everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Lighter Side of True Crime. I'm your host, Keith Rovere. I am so excited, and I have been so excited to interview Mark Olshaker for a while now. He is the author of the book Mindhunter. If you haven't read the book, you have definitely seen the Netflix series Mindhunter. There's a couple fictional tales that are told in that, but it's pretty spot on. But the book, you have to read the book if you haven't yet. New York Times bestseller, and it's been around for a while now. It is amazing. And just the talking to John Douglas, if I had an hour with him, I would lose my mind. But to spend decades, just talking to John, being part of his team meetings, and when he was sitting with them while they were profiling people, and if the first movie to come out as a series, or just one movie, The Mind of a Serial Killer, through the Nova program, the Nova series back in the day, where it really takes you inside the team. We talk a little about that, and you'll hear just in a minute. But to spend that many years with John Douglas and his team of profiles, and just learning everything, about the human mind, how depraved it can be, and with mental illness and everything else, and obviously from the victim side, because they spend probably more time with the victims than they do, with the serial killers themselves. But it's an amazing conversation. So I'm going to stop yapping now, and let's just get to Mr. Mark Olshaker. Well, first of all, thank you. Thanks for taking the time. It's definitely an honor and pleasure to talk to you tonight.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Sure. Before we kind of take a deep dive, I would love to find out, a lot of people don't know about you, your time with Nova. Award-winning time producing series Nova, which I used to love as a kid, which was great. And even like some of your earlier books, I think it was Einstein's Brains, one of your first books.
Right.
But even before that, where did this passion come from? Obviously you dedicated your life, to the works that you've created, but from a young age, or when did it really get that spark?
Well, I guess I've always been interested in some sort of creativity, and I guess by the school right I was particularly creative in. I liked that. I still love the theater, but it wasn't something in to be professional, I thought.
Mm-hmm.
But I was always interested in something creative,
Mm-hmm.
and so when I got out of college, I went to work for an advertising agency in town, which was the best and worst decision I made. Well, it wasn't. Let's put it this way: it wasn't what I wanted to do, and I realized that in about 3 months. I didn't want to just write about other people's products, but so I left under very good terms, and became started freelancing, and then went to work for the Washington bureau of the St. Louis Post-Dispatch newspaper. But the important part of this, Keith, is that the person who replaced me didn't work out, and then the person I met while I was at the Post Dispatch, and she was there, and she became my wife, and
Wow.
49 years later, still is. So,
Wow.
so uh, joining the agency wasn't the smartest thing I did, but leaving it was the smartest thing, and or the luckiest thing, shall we say? And I started freelancing. I worked, as I say, for the St. Louis Post Dispatch. I did a stint working part time for Xerox in management training, which was a very good experience in script writing. I worked on documentary films. I wrote a nonfiction book and then novels. So, kind of a little bit of everything. Whatever came along, I would take and try, and it was kind of an adventure. And I was doing documentary films. I had worked with my partner, production partner Larry Klein, for Nova, the PBS
Mm-hmm.
Science series, and I had written 3 or 4 novels at that point, thrillers. We'd done several films already, and I had read the book of Silence of the Lambs, the
Yeah.
novel so many other people had, and then I thought, well, I hear this is going to become a movie. And if it's anywhere near as good a movie as it was a book, it'll probably do really well. I didn't
Mm-hmm.
realize how well it would do.
Yeah.
So I called Paula Apsell, the executive producer of Nova at WGBH in Boston. And I said, Paula, this movie is going to be coming out. I think it's going to be a big hit. Why don't we do the real story behind these profilers? And she said, "Well, give it a try. Look into it, see if it looks. It's not the kind of science we normally do, but it is psychology." And so look into it, see if you think there's something there. So I called the public relations people at the FBI Academy in Quantico, where the behavioral science unit operates out of.
Hmm.
And this was before serial killers became a
Yeah.
thing, if you will.
Yeah.
And they were only too happy to welcome us down there. And we started looking around and we said, yeah, I think there really is a film here. So we ended up uh, going into production. I spent a lot of time with the what was then called the investigative support unit of the
Hmm.
behavioral science unit, which was the actual
Hmm.
operational profilers. Met their sort of founding director, John Douglas, and all of the other. I think there were about 8 or 9 people in it at that point.
Hmm.
They were operating out of offices that had originally been designed at Quantico to be the emergency headquarters if they were attacked or bombed or anything. So these offices, you got to it by a slow, long freight elevator
Yeah.
at 60 feet underground. So they used to say that, yeah, the behavioral science unit is buried 10 times deeper than dead people. But so, and I got to know these people. We ended up producing a film called Mind of a Serial
Oh
Killer,
yeah. Yeah.
which was nominated for a national Emmy and did quite well.
Hmm.
The investigative support unit actually got more requests for their services every time it was on,
Yeah.
and I got to know John Douglas pretty well.
Yeah.
And then I would say several months, or I'm not even sure how long after the film aired, John called me and said, "Look, I'm getting ready to retire. Do you think anybody would be interested in my story?" And
Yeah.
I said, "Well, I certainly am. Let's see." So with my agent's input, we compiled a proposal, went to
Hmm.
New York and pitched it to a number of publishers, and got several offers. And
Yeah.
ended up with Scribner, part of Simon and Schuster, a very established, good publisher.
Hmm.
And probably the smartest thing I did was come up with the title Mindhunter.
Yeah. Hmm. Oh,
So,
for sure.
and it did quite well.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Became a fairly major New York Times bestseller. So at that point,
Hmm.
we said, well, let's continue. We've got more stories to tell.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Hmm.
next one was Journey into Darkness, and then
Hmm.
Obsession. Then let's see, the next one was Anatomy of Motive, and
Hmm.
then the
Cases that haunt us
Cases
are
That
right there.
Haunt Us.
Yeah.
Good for
Yeah.
you, Pete. Thank
Yeah.
you. And so we just kept going, and I think at this point now we've probably done 10 books or so.
Oh yeah.
Uh, there just are a lot of stories to tell, and
Oh, for sure.
as you pointed out in our discussion beforehand, it seems to be a subject which people are very interested
Yeah.
in.
Now, you mentioned the Silence of the Lambs when you first read that. What
Sure.
was it about that book that really caught your eye? Like, you know what? There's something here. Is something specific about that book?
Well, I think there was an added dimension, but besides violence and besides killers and victims and all of that, and I think it gets to the basic thrust of why people like true crime and also crime fiction. And I think because we all have these emotions, which is love, hate,
Mm.
jealousy, uh, envy, joy, despair, dread, and true crime and crime fiction are about these emotions, which really is how we define the human condition. But this
Mm-hmm.
is the human condition writ large at the margins, and I think that's what fascinates people, and they see how people who are very much unlike them
Yeah.
behave. Thank God they're unlike them. Excuse me, and also how victims behave. And one of the
Mm-hmm.
things that we never ever do in our writing, Keith, is in any way glamorize the
Sure.
killers.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely not. The people we glamorize, if you will, are the police officers, the
Yeah.
detectives,
Yeah.
the crime solvers, and the people who we have complete empathy for are the victims and the victims'
Yeah.
families and what they go through for. And
Yeah.
fortunately, as much as he's fascinating, there aren't any real Hannibal Lecters in life,
Yeah.
thank God.
Mhm.
Um, if there really were, he would have other means of expressing himself
Yeah.
than eating people, if you
Yeah.
will. So, but I think that's one of the things that fascinated me, and I think that's
Mhm.
one of the things that keeps this going is that it
Yeah.
really is about the basic tenets of the human condition.
Yeah. And when you mentioned Quantico, I mean,
Mhm.
that's almost like a mythical place.
Yeah.
For watching TV shows and movies. Well, how was it for you when you first visited there? Was it almost like a shock factor, like an awe, or was it like, okay, it's just a couple offices? I knew you said he went underground, which is kind of cool, but
Yeah,
was it just like a normal office building, or was there a
a
little something
complex.
special?
It's
Yeah.
it's a complex. It's on the Marine base, so they've got outdoor ranges, they've got indoor ranges. So it was, yeah, it was.
Yeah.
After hearing about it and reading about it, it's a cool place to visit. Yeah, a
Yeah.
lot of it is offices, but it's very nicely designed. There's all kinds of things there because since they train new agents
Mhm.
and also police fellows there in an 11-week program. They have eating places, they have a gym, they have running
Mhm.
tracks, they have all kinds of things. They have
Yeah.
obviously a shooting range and a library essentially of
Yeah.
all the weapons that they've used and seized over the years. So
Oh, wow.
it's a
Yeah.
pretty fascinating place. And this was all before 9/11 when security
Mhm.
wasn't nearly as tight as it is now. So once I would sign in there, I was kind of free to go about,
Yeah.
wherever I wanted. And what's interesting is then when Netflix finally produced the uh, dramatic version of Mindhunter, even though they filmed it at other places. The sets they used for Quantico or the locations, I said, boy, that really does look like the Academy.
I was going to ask you later on about that. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
great.
yeah.
No, was John? We see this John Douglas now, almost like larger than life. His great personality.
Mhm.
Did that catch you? Like, why did you pick him? Was that
Well,
because of
first of
his
all,
just
he was
personality?
he was the founder, if you will. He was the OG, a term I don't use very often, but he is the one who figured out uh, while he was still an instructor at Quantico, traveling around the country on what they called road schools,
Yeah.
where they would teach local police departments and uh, one week here and then another week somewhere else before they would go back to Quantico. And he said, "Well, look, as long as we're out here, let's try to learn about the people that we're teaching about. Let's
Yeah.
try to learn about criminal behavior and criminal psychology." So, just using their FBI credentials, he and his partner, Robert Ressler, another
Mhm.
instructor, would go into the prisons and penitentiaries, wherever they were, and ask, who you got that we can talk to. And
Yeah.
surprisingly, a lot of people wanted to talk to them. We can talk about why, if you like.
Mhm.
And so they compiled a study, essentially, of serial killers and repeat violent sexual predators, which eventually became a study and then a
Mhm.
book, uh, and then led to what they call the crime classification
Mhm.
manual. And what this did, Keith, was for the first time they were able to correlate what was in the mind of the offender before, during, and after the crime. And this gave them tremendous insight into personality, and therefore they were able to use clues that they would find at the crime scenes, or obviously they didn't find them themselves. I mean,
Mhm.
they're all consulting with local police departments and sheriff's departments, but they could use these clues and use what they knew about the crime to start saying, this is the kind of person we think it's going to be.
Yeah.
And so, you don't name a person, but you say it's this type of person. And so, therefore, it can really help local departments to narrow their list of suspects or who they're
Yeah.
looking for. And often the profilers could describe post-offense behavior, which would let other people know or know what to look for, and
Mhm.
sometimes use even uh, proactive techniques to
Yeah.
draw the killer out.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Mhm.
Now, when you mentioned Mind of a Serial Killer, it's like the series Mindhunter. I got to watch it at least once a year. I've been doing that
God,
for a long
God
time.
bless you, Keith.
Oh, I love it. And it's funny because one of my favorite scenes,
Mhm.
people won't even probably first jumps out to the mind, it probably won't be this, but it's like at the very beginning, the elevator's doors open and
Hmm.
John Douglas and the team come out. It's like power walking out. I'm like, yeah, here they come. Here's the guys. But I want to ask you the way you shot that film. Rewatching again a couple weeks ago. But I loved it. It's almost like when they're sitting at the table, the camera's like eye level, like I'm sitting there with them. And I get the feeling every time I watch, like I'm part of the team, like a little fly on the wall kind of thing. Was that purpose
It's
or is
very
that?
interesting. It's very interesting you say that because David Fincher, uh, who was the essentially the visionary behind the series, the producer and director, he said, "This is a film about conversations, and that it's about confrontational conversations."
Mm,
And so all of the intrigue, the violence, the implied violence, all of that is really about people talking to each other. And so the fact that you were able to get into it on that level, and
oh, yeah.
what most people think about in the show when they think about what they liked is these people sitting at a table confronting each other and trying to get the best of each other.
Yeah.
I
Mm,
mean, and you have people like you have people like Ed Kemper, who was
yeah.
and he looked amazingly like the real Ed Kemper.
Oh, well, a
Talking,
few of them did.
he's a really big guy, very imposing. Then you have people like Charlie Manson, who were very small and had to figure out ways to assert themselves. So in the film and also in real life, he got up on the back
Yeah.
of the chair so he could be above the eye level of the two guys
Yeah.
interviewing him in real life, John Douglas and Bob Ressler. And in the Mindhunter series, they're somewhat fictionalized. They have different
Sure.
names, but they essentially did just what was done in real life. So we were
Yeah.
happy with the series and very happy with the way that they had used actual dialogue from the book.
Oh, yeah. Now, did you, even when making From Mind a Serial Killer and on, were you part of some of those kind of like profiling conversations? Like, were you sitting down with the group to kind of listening to how they do it? And what was that
Oh yeah,
experience
yeah.
like? And,
We
oh,
we
wow.
were there for a lot of the case consultations or what they
Wow.
call it, and it's fascinating. I mean, it's eerie and it's scary because you've got a lot of crime scene photos, which are sometimes
Yeah.
very brutal, on the table. You've got all of the autopsy protocols and other
Mm,
scientific evidence, and whoever's the lead agent on that case will present it and give his theory, and everybody else will, all the other profilers will critique it and add to the store of knowledge, and
oh, gotcha.
that turned out to be very, very effective.
Wow. Now, I heard initially from I heard John talk about it too, where I don't know, it was just in Quantico or just in general that they weren't like automatically the go-to guys. There's a little hesitancy, but it wasn't. I think it was like the Wayne Williams case. Was that the first
Absolutely.
time where it's like, no,
Sure.
oh, they? I think we're onto something with these guys here.
Well, and it didn't even start that way with the Atlanta child killers. John went down there and talked to the task force, and there was a lot of pushback at first.
Mm,
And John said, "Look, you're not looking for a Ku Klux Klan type
yeah,
operation. You're you're looking for, even though these were young black children by and large and young men." He said, "You were looking for a young black man," and he went on
mm,
to explain how that was true and
yeah,
why it was true, and or why he thought it was true. And there was a lot of pushback. And he said, "Look, I don't have to be here. I'm trying to help you. If you don't want me, I'll go home." And he obviously stayed, and it worked out. And you're right that the Atlanta child case was really one of the first ones that really put the profilers on the map. Now, what's interesting is there were almost 20 murders, I think. And John and his partner at the time, Roy Hazelwood, another very prominent profiler, an instructor, said, no, they didn't do all of them. They did this group. And
wow,
even that, the fact that they could distinguish from this supposed series of murders, which ones were actually part of the series, really also showed how specific they could be.
wow, it's absolutely amazing. And there's still people who think he's innocent. Now, even some of my followers,
Yeah,
they swear, and
well,
I'm like, I don't get it. I'm okay,
one of
but
one
it's
of the reasons is the person you see being arrested or you find committing the crime, and
mm,
the person who eventually appears in court or on the media. doesn't often look like the same person. They're
Oh
cleaned
yeah.
up. They've had
Yeah.
time to practice. And, one of the things about serial killers, Keith, is they are good at what they do by definition. If they're a serial
Mhm.
killer, that means they've been successful because they've been able to do it more than once. They can, depending on the profile of the particular type of serial killer, they can be charming, they can
Oh
be
yeah.
very ordinary. You can look right through them. I mean, that's
Hmm.
that's what's happened so many times. You look at somebody like Dennis Rader, the BTK strangler in
Hmm.
Wichita, Kansas. People were looking right through him. He
Yeah.
was he worked for the county. He was the president of his
Yeah.
church.
Yeah.
He was married.
Hmm.
He was a Boy Scout leader,
Hmm.
and he was
It's amazing.
also a violent killer.
Oh yeah, I mean that's the thing. Like they have this ability. I think he called it cubing. I got to know Dennis a little bit. Cubing with his brain, you could turn it off and on.
Hmm.
But talking to all the relationships that I put up with serial killers over the years, they all say the same thing. When people like just fanatical people want to write them a letter, or get to a phone call, they're all picturing because of the media mostly Hannibal Lecter. They all live
Hmm.
under a rock in a cave, and
Yep.
they're like foam come out of the mouth, and they can sense when they finally get to a phone call with this stranger, um, the sense of thrill and excitement leaving
Hmm.
because they're talking, "Hey, how you doing?" They want to talk about sports or the game. They're not. You're getting an Ed Kemper, a very high IQ. You're not getting, always that Hannibal
No, and
Lecter kind of guy.
Ed Kemper, who has actually walked away from parole several times, thinks that he
Yeah.
actually belongs in prison. He's now in his, I guess, late 70s.
Hmm.
And do you know what he does in his time in prison?
What's that?
He records books for the blind.
Oh, did that? I know. Yeah, yeah.
He's
Hmm.
got a good voice, and that's what he enjoys doing, and
Yeah.
it's very productive.
Yeah, I think recently he stopped talking. I think a few years ago, maybe 5 or 6 years ago. I think he
Yeah.
had only had a stroke or a heart condition, something like that. But just cut off communication with everybody. Stopped talking. I'm not really sure why.
Now, what's interesting about Kemper is, unlike almost any other serial killer we've studied, anyone I can think of, when he had finished what he started out to do, which was actually ultimately to get back at his mother,
Yeah.
once he had killed her and his mother's best friend, he drove for a while overnight and then called the police and turned himself in.
Yeah.
I don't know of any other serial killer who has done that. So
Yeah.
that shows
Hmm.
at least a certain amount of introspection and self-knowledge on Kemper's part. And as you say, he's
Hmm.
a pretty bright guy by the standards of serial killers.
Yeah. The only other one that I know I've had on my podcast a few times is Wayne Adam Ford. He was
Ah,
one nicknamed Serial Killer with Compassion and
mhm.
dismembered bodies. And the gruesome part about it is when he turned himself in with his brother, they didn't believe him. So
They didn't
out of his,
believe Kemper either to
he
begin
had
with.
to take
Yeah,
a severed breast in a baggie out of his pocket and say, "It's me," and then turned himself
yeah,
in.
that's
And
pretty grim.
oh, for sure. But one thing good about him, and reason I have somebody like him on my podcast, is I always focus on positive change, prison reform, mental health. Like he wants to help others. Like that's why he turned himself in. And believe it or not, he does help others because I have some people who are really struggling with those desires who listen to my show and reach out to me. So what am I going to say? I'm not a doctor. But through Wayne, like almost like a mediator, he's actually helping them because he understands what they're going through. So even from prison, he's actually still helping people from him being autistic and
Keith,
obviously
would you ever want him to get out?
no, no.
Okay.
Most of these men and women that I talk, I mean, there are a few. Like I'm very close with Tex Watson and Bruce Davis and the Manson family. Those,
Mhm.
yeah, I think that's a different story. I think they weren't necessarily psychopathic. I think influence and
Yeah, I
change.
mean,
There's,
here's my take on them. Um, I don't think any of them are dangerous. I don't think there's any chance or any reasonable chance that if you let them out, they would commit more crimes. On the other hand, I've studied the case. I've seen the crime scene
oh
photos, which
yeah,
are horrendous. I have read the autopsy protocols, particularly on Sharon Tate, who was eight and a
mm,
half months pregnant.
mm,
And, you know, I just think the crimes were so horrific that
yeah,
these people need to remain in prison for forever.
yeah,
Not that as they say, maybe they're rehabilitated, maybe
mm,
I don't think they're dangerous. I don't think even think Charlie Manson was dangerous anymore.
mm,
But the crimes were so horrific that
yeah.
just the sense of balance, I wouldn't let them out.
Yeah. I think that'd be the majority of opinion. You know,
I mean,
that
now
are
the
out
one
there.
that they
Yeah.
let out for compassionate release because she
Well, the
was
girl. Yeah.
cancer, that I mean, that's a different story,
Yeah.
obviously.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's a hot topic where a lot of people think that some they should get out, they shouldn't get out, at least a chance for parole. You know,
Mm.
and but when you're like Keith, the happy face killer, Keith Jesper, for example, he was
Yeah.
numerous times on my podcast. I got to know him very well.
Hmm.
In his mind, and I believe him, he says, I have no urge to kill. I'll never kill again if I get out. But there's some brain abnormalities when there are certain kinds
Yeah.
of psychopathy where his murders, he hitchhiked. I mean, he was a long haul truck driver. Millions of girls hitchhiked with him, and they were perfectly fine. But his form, his brain abnormality, is when he gets pushed, when he gets
Hmm.
aggravated. He doesn't have that stop button like we all have. You know, if somebody cuts us off. So you don't have. You can say you're not going to kill again, but if you get in that situation where someone aggravates you enough, you're going to kill. I mean,
So,
there's.
I mean, and
Mhm.
the way I would state that is, and I think you're absolutely right. And the way I would state that is, let's say you've got 100 of these guys who you let out on parole. What's your acceptable failure rate?
Oh,
1%, 2%, no percent? That's how I
yeah,
would state it.
yeah. It's definitely
And
very
you know,
thoughtful. Yeah.
we all know the formulation that it's better to let 100 guilty men go
Uh-huh.
free than
Yeah.
to imprison one innocent one. And of course, we all believe that. But you have to take it one step further in that analogy and say, all right, but if you let these 100 guilty people go free, how many innocent people are you endangering?
Yeah. It's true. It's definitely true. I'm glad I'm not on the parole board.
Yeah,
That's for
yeah.
sure.
No, it's
That's
it's a
definitely it.
hard job, no question.
Yeah, it's a shame because I look at people. You know, I think there's evil people in the world,
Hmm.
and I look at serial killers. It's those people think it's crazy until you really start thinking about this. A lot of them, I don't look at all of them as evil. I think they have brain abnormalities that help, I would say cause them, might be the wrong word, but highly influence what they do, evil, horrible things. I think we
Hmm.
need more studies, what you guys have been doing over the years, you know, the preventative matter, and more studies on the brain. What is psychopathy? How it's not
Yeah.
treatable, but, you know, like Dennis Rader is a prime example where I wrote a little bit about the Norway prison system, where psychopathy, someone, a pure psychopath who's not deterred by fear, you know, that kind of thing, but they are by reward. So
Hmm.
they controlled Dennis Rader in prison for at least when he first got there, when he's getting a little bit out of control, with a reward. Oh, you're going to behave yourself this week. You're going to get extra pudding on your plate. So the
Hmm.
Norway prison system, which you probably, I'm sure you know, it's a positive reinforcement reward-based prison, the lowest recidivism rate of violent offenders in the world. Where here in America, it's that negative, negative, negative punishment style. But when you get to mental health and psychopathy, it's punishing isn't always the best option. You know, you got to. We don't really know what the best option is for people like that, especially when you're still out in the world. So
Hmm.
it's with prison and locking them up. It's a
Well,
tough
I think
conversation.
it's very difficult to rehabilitate these people, particularly these people who, let's let's face it, haven't been habilitated in the first place.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
you look at somebody like
Mhm.
Dennis Rader, who goes for long periods without committing the crime, and we always wondered what's going before we knew who it was, before we knew it was
Yeah.
just the BTK Strangler. Why is he stop and then why does he continue? And what we found out when he was finally captured was he would stop when something would happen. In one case, his wife, who was completely innocent, she found him dressed in women's
Yeah.
clothing in an autoerotic asphyxiation mode, and she didn't realize that this was his particular kink and that the clothing belonged to one of his victims.
Yeah.
And she was just shocked. She was a very innocent young woman, and said, "If you ever do this again, I'm leaving you." And so he obviously had enough self control to stop for
Yeah.
years. So this gets
Hmm.
back to, yes, these people, serial killers, any kind of violent offender, it's almost always a combination of nature and
Yeah.
nurture, the way they're hardwired, as you say, and also kind of the bad background that most
Yeah.
of, but they do have the choice. I mean, yeah, I can
Hmm.
cite some who didn't. You've probably heard of a
Hmm.
killer named Richard Trenton Chase,
Yeah.
who who killed young women so that he could drink their blood to stay
Yeah.
alive. Now, anybody who's tried, I haven't tried it, but anybody who has tried to drink blood, I mean, it's a pretty disgusting
Yeah.
experience. but he needed to do it. And then when he was in prison, he couldn't obviously get the blood of young women anymore. So any bird or any animal that would find its way near or into his
Mm.
cell, he would grab it, break its neck, and chomp into it and drink its blood. And he eventually committed suicide. Now, I would maintain that Richard Trenton Chase really was insane by the
So
legal definition. And we have to keep in mind insanity is a legal definition, it's not a
yeah.
medical definition. But the general definition of insanity, going all the way back to the McNaughton case in England several centuries ago, is do you understand the difference between right and wrong?
Yeah.
And can you conform your behavior to society? And the sort of the theoretical test we use is called the policeman at the elbow, which is if you were going to commit a crime and then a uniformed police officer walks up and you don't commit the crime, then you're
Mm.
rational.
Yeah.
If you
Yeah.
still commit the crime and he arrests you, you probably do have a degree of mental
Mhm.
instability. And look, having said that, I would maintain, and I think you would agree with me, Keith, that anybody who commits cold-blooded murder or any kind of crime like that in cold blood or any kind of predatory sexual crime is mentally ill. I
Oh yeah.
mean, normal people don't do that,
Yeah.
but you can be mentally ill and still be able to control your behavior and
Mhm.
dictates of society. So, yeah, I would say
Mhm.
I don't think we've come across many killers or serial rapists or anybody else who is not mentally ill, but
Yeah.
that's not an excuse in
Of
and of
course. Have you found in all the interviews and listening to John Douglas and all the reading all the stuff about serial killers, any of them that you felt were truly remorseful? Like maybe they did it for again mental health reasons, or whatever. But you really got a sense because everybody
well,
says
I
that they're
think
innocent, but you know,
some of them. I mean, you get a certain type of rapist who can be remorseful, and those
mm,
people actually can be rehabilitated. But we've come up with 6 or 8 typologies of rapists, and
oh
so
wow,
unfortunately, if a woman or even a man is being sexually assaulted, they're not going to be able to say, all right, now which typology is this? How should I
okay,
react? Is this the kind of rapist where if I resist, he'll go away, or if I resist, will he hurt me
yeah,
more? Unfortunately, you can't do that. It's only retrospectively that you can figure these things out.
yeah,
But yeah, I mean, some can be, and some are remorseful. I think somebody like Ed Kemper is maybe not remorseful, but I think he understands what he did and he understands why he did it, and I suspect he's probably remorseful that he killed those young co-eds at the University
mm,
of California, Santa Cruz. Even though he's been in prison for many decades, I'm remorseful that he killed his mother because she was the font of
yeah,
all of his problems as he
yeah.
pursued it.
Mm. Now you mentioned Mindhunter. Coming
Yeah.
back to that, we mentioned you came up with the name. Where did actually the name come from? I know you came up with it, but how does that tie
Well,
in? And what does that mean
you
to
know,
you?
I think
Mhm.
the first and only time I had seen it was there was an article that I looked at from before I started on all this in Psychology Today, talking about the mind hunters of the behavioral science unit, and that was
Ah,
the
I gotcha.
only reference I'd ever heard. But when it came time to write the book, uh, I thought, well, what are these people? And Mindhunter just kind of stuck in my brain, and John
Oh,
liked
nice.
it. So, and now John loves it because it's his
Mhm.
identity.
Oh
And
yeah, of course. Now, usually when you have like somebody, a songwriter, musician, or a movie producer, they know when they got something. You know,
yeah,
but I mean, did you know when you were writing this, or is it's coming to an end? I mean, you're really
um,
one of the
I
most
knew we were. I
influential
knew we
books
were
ever
telling
written.
good. Yeah, I knew we were telling good stories.
Mm,
Whether it would resonate with the public or not, I didn't know. I hoped it would because of the popularity,
yeah,
particularly of the Silence of the Lambs movie, and we got very good reviews and good notices when it came out. So yeah, I was uh, very grateful for that. And then I think that gave us confidence that we could go on and tell more stories because
yeah,
kind of just scratched the surface. But the book came out decades ago, and it's still selling and it's still
yeah,
popular.
yeah,
People
yeah.
still respond to us. John was just down at CrimeCon, which is like 4,000 people come
Yeah.
here. This one was in Las Vegas, and he had like tremendous audiences, and he was like a rock
Oh.
star.
When Netflix came and when you got involved in the director of
Yeah,
and putting it together, did he truly understand? I guess because I guess you talked from before, from the first thing that you did, with the Mind of Serial Killer. Did he understand like the nuts and bolts of it to transfer that to film? And
yeah, I think so. I think David Fincher was really the motivating force behind this, and he had read Mindhunter and really understood it, and got good actors in there. So yeah, I think the book was really taken to heart in the production of the series, and so we were very happy with it. And even though they had to take some liberties, obviously,
sure, yeah,
the whole thing rings true, and it really does trace how the behavioral science profiling program and this serial killer study really got started.
oh for
And
sure.
the portrayals of the killers that were studied was really
Mhm.
remarkable, I thought.
Well, didn't you take a lot of the actual transcripts from the real conversations that he had? Was that
Well,
some of the dialogue? That's
almost,
what I heard.
almost. Now,
Okay.
what happened was the first couple of interviews they did, they recorded, and they realized that that was inhibiting the free conversation. So
Mm,
after that, they stopped recording. They would really study the case, so they knew it inside and out, so that the interview subjects couldn't screw around with them and all
yeah.
that. They could say, hey Wayne, look, this is what really happened.
Yeah.
And then as soon as the interview was over, and the interview could take hours, I mean, to really get these people to unwind and tell the truth. And so, and as soon as they did that, they would write everything down. So it was
Okay.
all from memory. So yeah, I mean, there was a lot of dialogue that they remembered. So it wasn't transcripts, but it was close.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
The million dollar question is: are they going to continue? You can't leave me hanging.
I know, I
I can
know.
see what
Well,
happens with Pressler,
look,
with the son, with BTK. I'm like, come on.
we obviously really wanted to, and David
Sure.
Fincher originally came up with a 5-season arc for the show. It was very expensive, apparently, to produce. It was a cult hit. I don't know how popular it was in
Yeah.
general. I mean, certainly, um, my Netflix still refers to it as their prestige television, and there's been talk of reviving it. Who knows? I mean,
You always hear the rumors.
we would
Latest
we would
rumors, like
we
a
would we
couple
would we would
movies. And
love we would love for the rumors to be true, obviously. Yes.
oh, of course, yeah, because every
But
year or
no,
so you get the
we were very
tease.
happy with the series and would love for it to continue. And we love the actors in it. Jonathan Groff, who's
Oh,
become a
perfect.
big hit on Broadway, as you know, and Holt McCallany, who works regularly in television. They're
Yeah.
great guys.
Oh, for
In
sure.
fact, we wrote two other books after the series was on. We wrote several. One called The Killer Across the Table, and which is really about these kind of interviews.
Mhm.
And so I contacted Jonathan and said, "Would you consider doing the audio book?" And he said,
Oh,
"Okay."
wow.
So he did that. And then the one after that, the Killer's Shadow, which was about the racist serial killer, Joseph Paul Franklin. We got Holt to narrate it.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Like we mentioned a little bit earlier that most of my life I've been involved in prison ministry, prison aftercare, just when
Mhm.
obviously with talking, building a relationship with
and
serial
and
killers.
I think that's I think that's a wonderful thing, and
Oh, thank
I can tell you that one our most recent book, When a Killer Calls, which is about the murder of Sherry Faye Smith by Larry Gene Bell.
you.
Uh, Sherry's father was and continued to be a prison minister, and
Oh, wow.
that's very important. So
Oh, it's
I think
wonderful.
the poignancy of this young woman of faith, she was 17 years old,
Mm-hmm.
who was brutally murdered by a real
Mm-hmm.
psychopath, kept that faith enough to continue his prison ministry.
Oh, that's good. I was going to say that it's just part of my life. It's what I do. And I'm not again hearing gruesome stories from the serial killers or victims. It doesn't affect me like
Mhm.
that, like horribly. But so many people it does.
Sure.
And my day, like even a friend of mine years ago, it was an early school shooter, one of the early guys. He's been great for decades now in San Quentin. Did a lot of good things. She wanted to write him a letter. He said, "Yeah, okay, write a letter." And then I hear from her for like a week. like, "Hey, Cindy, what's going on?" She's like, "I've been having anxiety attacks." Just the thought of writing him a letter and him saying yes. He's like, "I haven't
Sure.
slept for a week. I can't." So that's the normal reaction. And people ask
Yes.
me all the time,
Yes.
"Hey, how do I write a serial killer?" I'm like, no. Mentally, you don't know what you're getting yourself into. For you, obviously being so close to all this, does it come a point where you or even John had to just kind of take a step, like, let me take a break here? If I'm starting to feel this
Sure.
emotionally.
Sure. You know, we can be fairly dispassionate about it and analytical, and particularly when you're writing about it. Um, Anything having to do with kids obviously gets to me.
Hmm.
Anything having to
Hmm.
do with animals, but we've become very close to the families of a number of murder victims, and I
Hmm.
have been to um, murder victim groups and spoken with them and talked to them and
Wow.
spoken before them, and so we have tremendous compassion for them. And look, no question, it's very difficult to meet somebody for the first time and say, okay, can you tell me about your murdered daughter?
Yeah.
Obviously, you don't do it
Hmm.
that way, but we have, I guess, we've learned how to talk to these people and realize what they've gone through, that there is no such thing as closure in these kind
Yeah.
of situations, and yet they do go on with their lives, and in many cases, very heroically. So, yes,
Yeah.
I'm very close, and John is very close to a number of victims' families who,
Good.
long after we still interact with. Yeah.
That's good. Speaking of how cases affect us, your book, The Cases That Haunt Us,
Hmm.
what have been some of the cases that people are just like, that's too much? It really
Sure.
affected me. And what were some of the
Yeah,
cases
and
that
a
really
case
stood out?
like the John Benet Ramsey case, which has
Oh,
never been solved. A beautiful 8-year-old girl brutally murdered. Um, that's hard to get past. And
yeah.
I've spoken to her. Her mother, unfortunately, is deceased. I've spoken to her father, John Ramsey, a number of times, and
Mm,
you know, he's gone on with his life. He's gotten remarried after his wife died, but you never really get over it.
yeah.
There's a hole there, as you know, that is never filled.
Mm. What do you think this fixation is with serial killers? I mean, for example, we focus not so much on the preventative measures, but they just want to take deep dives in lives of serial killers, like the Ed Gein documentary recently,
Yeah.
or the movie on Netflix, where people, if you didn't know, like a true crime like fanatic, like, oh, it was a spooky movie, it was a great series. But if you're a true crime fan, you're like, oh, that was horrible. That wasn't true. That wasn't true. I'm like, oh, you're going a little too deep.
Hmm.
What are some of the
Well,
dangers of like
I
this
think
much fanatic?
the fascination probably is that these people are so unlike us, and Ed Gein is is about as unlike us
Yeah,
as it's possible to be. I mean, who else could inspire a story like Psycho, for
yeah.
instance? Um, but
Or Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
yeah, but you know, John did interview Ed Gein in the Mendota Hospital for the Criminally Insane.
Really?
Yeah,
I didn't
and
know that.
and
Wow.
but he said Gein was so paranoid and so far gone at that point that he really didn't get much out of him. So
Oh,
he said, you know, whatever he did, and he was so mentally aberrant at that point, and probably was to begin with. So
wow.
he is one of those who probably was pretty far gone psychologically.
Yeah. I just had a forensic psychologist, Dr. Gwen Ashead, on. Taught it, at counseled at Broadmoor in UK for 20 years, all over,
Yeah.
just world famous, a wonderful woman. Definitely gave her life, to helping people. And we're talking about how many people there at Broadmoor who, when she started getting help, they were so thankful. Thanks for the help, and they really, like, really genuinely meant it. Have you come across, or do you know any names that jump out on top of your head, that people you were in contact with, and you and John, that really wanted to know through your interviews, like, why am I like this, and like they
Yeah,
wanted to get
a
help?
lot of a number of them really do want to know why they did this.
It really okay.
Um, I think a number of them, Dennis Rader, for instance, my guess would be the kind of crimes he did. I mean, what he got off on was not torture, it was not the murder itself. It was watching his victims die, and
Mm-hmm.
that was art to him. He called
Okay.
them his projects,
Yeah.
and so I would guess that every night in prison he relives his crimes in his own mind. I mean,
Mm.
that's That was the most important thing in his life. He had a wife, he had two children, he had a job, he was president of his church, but this was the most important thing in his life. This was what kept him going. And you know, how do you deal with that? The only way you can deal with it is take them out, take them off the street.
Oh, oh, sure. It won't stop. Very, very
Yeah,
few have stopped.
yeah.
For
Now
sure over
that
the
and
years.
now that in no way negates or obviates the kind of work you've done in prisons. I mean, I think that's
Hmm.
really important. I think any
Yeah,
kind of uplift or insight you can
yeah,
give these people is all to the good, even in
yeah,
terms of learning to live in a prison community, even if they're never
yeah.
getting out.
Yeah, I've noticed, through all my years talking to people, and even those who, are still, psychopathic and still obviously can't get out,
Yeah.
the ones that have more controlled in prison, it's either been through faith, obviously for me, Christianity, but it could be other things too. But in my circle, it's been Christianity that really changed their hearts inside.
Mhm.
Um, and just those showing them just unconditional love of completely not deserving it. It's kind of like the Christian Bible, the gospel, forgiving those, who don't deserve it. But so most of them said, now that the secret's out, so to speak, what they've done, most of them never felt love from a father, love from a mother.
Well,
Organizations, volunteers to come in to help out, faith based or not, but just helping. Like David Berkowitz was a big one,
yeah.
where he really felt that love of people coming in. They didn't know him, but they kept coming every week into a prison, getting ridiculed and mocked by other people, but they kept coming and kept coming. But feeling that somebody actually cared about them started to make a change, or obviously faith too.
Mhm.
That's why I think that Norway prison system, I wish we adapted more of that, of
Yeah,
that
I think it's
positive
I think it's
reinforcement.
quite possible that
There's something
Berkowitz.
to that.
Yeah, I think it's quite possible that Berkowitz now understands what he did. I think from everything I understand, Mark David Chapman, who
Yeah.
murdered
Hmm.
John Lennon, he certainly has insight and
Yeah.
regrets what he did. I mean, these are
Hmm.
one-offs, though. These are not serial
Yeah.
killers. Well, Berkowitz was a serial killer,
Yeah.
certainly. Chapman was more than a
Sure.
killed one person. So yeah, I think some of these people do have some insight into what it is. And also, the
Yeah.
other thing you have to remember is a lot of these guys who really don't do well in the outside world, as harsh as prisons can be, particularly maximum security prisons, some of these guys can do very well in a structured environment like
Very much so. Oh, yeah.
they, as long as they don't have to make their own choices, if you will,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
the choices they are very constrained, they can do pretty well in that structured environment.
Yeah. I mean, that's why it's important. I live here, like in the South Jersey, Philadelphia area,
Mhm,
and a couple organizations that I help out with and volunteer with, they bought numerous houses in the area. So while
mhm,
they're still in prison, before they get transferred out, they have somewhere to go. They
mhm.
got structure. They have a job waiting for them. They
That's
have
very important.
housing and
To the
all that.
ones who are going to get out, that's very important.
Oh, big time.
Yeah.
Because a lot of because it's the same because it's like a circle. They come out to a group, couple meetings. Oh, they're doing great. Like you would let these kids, these men, like babysit your children. That's all like great they are. Mostly drugs. Get back on the drugs and like they'll stab you for $5. But you see the same people going back to prison, like and the circle. Unfortunately, but it does seem to be like those who do have structure when they come out tend to do a little bit better. When they have that foundation. Because if not, they're just going to commit another crime to go back in
And when you're
purposely.
talking about, you know, even felony murder or things like robbery, burglary, things like that, those
Hmm.
guys can often age out of it, and they can do pretty
It's
well
true too.
once they get out. As you say, if they have
Mhm.
some structure, if they have a job, if they have a home, things like that.
Yeah.
Um, the serial predatory, sexualized type offenders, I haven't seen any real evidence in almost any case of what I would consider true rehabilitation. I don't know that
Yeah.
it's possible. So
Hmm.
they again, they may do well in prison, and I hope they get the kindness that people like you can impart to them. But
Yeah.
I don't want them out again. I
No,
don't want
I 100% agree. Like with David Berkowitz, I've done a few projects with him, but from prison, where you should be, they can still help, like his Christian website.
Yeah,
He's
I
led
agree
more
with
people.
I certainly
He's led more
I
people to Jesus than most pastors, but right from
yeah,
where
I
you're at.
certainly endorse that. Yeah. Hmm.
But same with Tex Watson, saying his
Yeah.
website, but or
Yeah.
Wayne Adam Ford. That's why I have him, on my show because from there,
Hmm.
right there, that you can definitely, help other people, which is important too. That's
Yeah,
why I don't
and
give up
I
on them.
mean, as much evangelical type work as Tex Watson wants to do, good for
Hmm.
him.
Hmm.
I just don't want him out because of what I've seen.
Oh, sure. A lot of people agree.
Yeah.
And as we kind of wrap up, I've been everybody's coming on. I'll ask my little AI program. I'll say what we're talking about, and it always spits out a question. So this is from George, my AI guy. It
Hmm.
says, after spending decades studying violent offenders and the darkest parts of human behavior, has it made you more fearful of people or actually more understanding of them?
I would say both. I'm certainly
Mm.
wary of a lot of different kinds of people. I
Mhm.
hope I understand them. I hope I've gotten something out of all these 30 odd years of study. And I think, as much as anything else, I have tremendous compassion for the victims and the victims' families and
Yeah.
their bravery and just their ability to go on. And in spite of the fact that we know that there are a lot of abuses, I think the police, by and large, do a very good job and a very difficult job. I mean, we train them to be warriors and expect them to be social workers. So
Yeah.
it's a
Yeah.
it's
Good
a
point.
that's a very difficult job. I think detectives do a very good job, by and large. Prosecutors, the bigger departments generally have more experience and
Sure.
are more efficient than the smaller ones. And look, we all know of the abuses. We've seen them right and
Sure.
left, but
Mm.
there's still the small minority of
Yeah, of course.
most sworn officers and detectives are really trying to help people.
Oh, for sure. No, for all of your work that you've done, is there like an underlying theme as far as what you're really trying to achieve, with
Yeah,
with all this?
I think the thing that why do people do the things they do, and how do they react, and how do people react under stress, and what causes what is the you said it before yourself, Keith. What is the nature of good and evil?
Yeah, exactly, exactly right. Well, is anything else you got coming up? Anything you're working on that you want to talk
Well,
about? You want to
we're
plug or?
always looking at new material, and
Hmm.
uh, I don't want to say anything else, but there are still stories to tell, and
Oh, perfect.
John and I are still interested, and we're very grateful that people continue to be interested in our work.
Oh, you can't write the most influential book on sugar and not have the interest of like, what's
I'm
next?
very
What more? We need more.
I'm very grateful for that whole experience.
Sure.
And I'm working on some nonfiction now. I'm also about to write a novel, a historical novel, but involving crime. So
Nice. Well,
yeah.
I look forward to it for sure.
Well, anytime, Keith. You're a great host.
Great. Wait, thanks for your time. I really appreciate it. Well, there you have it. I could have talked to him for hours. We talk, even after the podcast stopped, you stop recording. Yeah, I still talking to him for a little while. And but what a great guy. And I can't wait to see his future projects. And fingers crossed that they continue the Mindhunter on Netflix. Where the last rumor that I heard, they're going to wrap it up with a couple movies. Maybe, maybe not. Hopefully so. I think he would love it just as much as we all would love it. So fingers crossed for that. Hopefully one day I'll get John Douglas on. I have talked to John a few times online, and so fingers crossed one day I'll have him on the podcast too. That'll be a blessing. But what a great guy Mark was, generous with his time, and I so appreciate it. And a big thanks to him. The links are below here on the YouTube page where you can find his books and you get all of them. I've read most of them, and you just won't be able to put them down. Get that firsthand experience of hanging out with John Douglas, and every book that he's written has been great. And if you haven't seen The Mind of a Serial Killer, you gotta see it. We talked about that first scene where the elevator's doors opens and John Douglas and his team come out, but it really puts you in a seat that you're listening to these profiles, like you're really sitting in there. Listening to them talk and dialogue about different cases. Oh, it's tremendous. You can find it on YouTube. It's a little fuzzy. That's the only place that I see it on. I see it like once a year, like Mindhunter. I gotta watch it once a year. But definitely check that. I think you really thoroughly enjoy it. And so we got a lot of good stuff coming up. Until next time, see ya.